Good morning, everyone. It's 11 o'clock on Tuesday, and you know what that means. It's time for Sand to Soul, and I actually shut the music off on time. How about that?
Oh my gosh, look at that, Stuart. I think we're officially learning. We don't skip a beat either. Look at after a long Labor Day weekend, here we are, committed to our process.
So good to see you, Anastasia. My name is Stuart Fournier. I'm a 25-year veteran of the Los Angeles and specifically beach areas, practicing real estate since the year 2000, and it's my pleasure to introduce.
Hello, everyone. My name is Anastasia Bonholzer. I am with AMS Mortgage Services, a mortgage broker, and I primarily focus in Los Angeles, and I'm also licensed in Texas and Florida. And today, I'm actually super excited about this topic, Stuart. You just kind of threw it at me, and I love it. HOAs,
Okay.
the organizations we love to hate, we hate to love. I mean, I don't know. It could either be good or it could even be really bad.
Well, I'll tell you something. After having dealt with hundreds of HOAs over my career, I could go on for hours about my experiences. So today, what we're going to try to do is just take 10 or 15 minutes this morning and talk about it in depth. There's a lot of controversy of misunderstandings, actually, more than anything, about the function of HOAs and why you have to deal with them, and obviously all the infighting that goes on. We're not going to cover all that. We'll touch on it, but we want to just talk about the basics today to sort of fill you in on exactly what an HOA is and why they exist and why they operate. But before you do, please feel free to join us if you have any questions about your current situation with your HOAs or anything about real estate in general. Please feel free to leave a question in the comments section. And if you leave a comment in the comment section or ask a question, we will give you a free Starbucks card. How about that? Yay! Wait. Here it is. There it is. All right.
Look at that. We got the sound effects going. It's getting
No,
better.
no, that was your audience, right? That's the audience you have in the
I
background
love
there.
it. I
Okay.
love it. I love it.
Well, this may sound really
Yeah,
dumb,
so
but
tell me, Stuart, what is the HOA and why do I need them?
okay. First of all, HOAs are required by law whenever a development is created. So just so you know, they're not something that just gets thrown on the property. There's actually a very stringent legal process. So when any time a developer has a multi-unit that they're developing, and that can be as small as 2 units and generally three and on upwards of there, they're required by law to create an association of ownership by everyone who owns the property so that there can be sort of a cohesive and organized way to decide how they're going to handle the property issues. That's the initial function of an HOA. Now, it does get a whole lot more complicated that in terms of responsibilities. We don't have time to go over all the responsibilities, but basically it's an excuse me, it's an association wow, that's created so there can be an understanding of how to handle problems, situations, and uh, expenses. Now, the expenses part, of course, is always the emotional part for everybody, right? In other words, look, the bottom line is even if you own your own house, the last thing you want to do, it's kind of like owning a car, is pay for car repairs or pay for home repairs. It's emotional. You try to find the best way possible. You know it's coming, but you really don't want to handle it. Well, with HOAs, it gets even one step removed from that because you have to deal with your neighbor when it comes to having something taken care of for your house. But the
And you
reason
all
I
have to
brought
be in agreement about
exactly
the repairs that need to occur, right? So
right.
there's a process to that too in terms of the inspections. And those are even have been legalized recently, as most recent as the balcony inspections in California. Now it's
Right.
law where everybody who has a balcony, regardless if you're on the ground floor, if your neighbor above you has a balcony, you must have a balcony inspection as of January 1 of 2025.
Right, and that's thrown turmoil like crazy, obviously from even a political standpoint, into, again, California being unreasonable. But just as an aside, understand that that came about as a number of tragedies actually happened
Yep.
when people had too much weight on their balconies and they simply collapsed. Now, it's a fantastic example of why you have an HOA to begin with. And I want to emphasize, especially in the beach areas, because in the beach areas, we are famous for having weather that really does punish structures in the coastal areas. And the
Mhm.
decks are some of the first examples of that. And we've had, like I said before, a couple of tragedies, I think one in Malibu and one in Santa Monica, where people actually got killed because the decks collapsed. And these are generally in units
Yep.
that are 10 to 20 years. But I will tell you from a real estate perspective, we've seen hundreds and hundreds of cases and inspections where the deck is called out in spite of, this new law. So that's just an aside of, and one of the responsibilities of the HOA. You do want to have a cohesive understanding with all the owners about what needs to be done with the house. Now, the reason I bring this up is because I had a client recently that was looking for property, and the client was obsessed with the amount of money that the HOA was going to charge. He was more than willing to pay the price of the houses that he was looking at, but he just had this real inkling that if the HOA was $400 as opposed to $700, he wasn't going to buy, right? And I understand that because it seems like it's a tax really more than it is anything when you go out to buy something. So I had to explain to him, no, and Anastasia, I'm sure you can back me up on this. One of the reasons that you shouldn't be just concerned about the amount of the HOA is because uh, you want to have enough money in reserve when the day comes that you actually have to spend the money,
Correct. And what
right?
does that money cover? Because there are times where the homeowners association does cover water, trash, perhaps even the walls and coverage, which is somebody's individual homeowners insurance policy, which covers the interior portions of their unit. There might be amenities. You might have a bellman. You might have laundry service. I mean, we know that, on some of the Wilshire corridors, HOAs are $1,800 a month. And what
Right,
does it cover? It covers everything. Somebody can literally go through and put groceries in your refrigerator and it would cover that, in
right,
addition to the six pools and spas and whatnot. So there's different things are get covered by that fee.
right. And so if you run into a situation where you don't have enough funds, then what happens? You get
Then we're going to
assessed.
have issues. We're going to
Right.
get issues with not only the financing, but what happens. You then get an increase in your dues through a special assessment. So if somebody is paying $400 a month and suddenly they do have issues with the balconies, and the balconies are going to cost $2 million to repair, which is in some cases we've seen it that drastic. What if they don't have enough money in the budget? They don't have $2 million in reserves. They would then have to come up with a special assessment during the course of a short period of time, usually a year to 2 years, where they increase everybody's homeowners association dues to cover for the repairs that are necessary. Most likely necessary because of safety and hazards. Usually it's an imminent danger if those repairs are not rectified in a timely manner.
Right. So let's look at that specifically, and let's look at that specific in the specific example I gave of my client. Now, if the client didn't have an HOA and they bought a house, what are the chances that in the next 20 to 25 years he's going to need a new roof? And the chances are probably 100%, right? And in that period of
Right.
time, right, he's actually racking up probably anywhere from 20 to $30,000 for a brand new roof. So you can cost average that over a number of years in relation to what he would have to have spent on the HOA. So it's almost an insurance policy. So there are two things I'd like to point out. Number one, when you're paying into an HOA, and unfortunately this is the big rub, it's not tax deductible as repairs are for a home. That's unfortunate.
Mhm.
But over the course of years, what you're doing is actually contributing money to your own insurance policy with regard to the repairs that you are going to have on the unit, especially in the coastal areas, over
Mhm.
the course of the next 10, 20 years, whatever it might be. So and the other point that I want to make is that a lot of times when people buy a house or they're involved in the HOA, they treat the HOA like a third party, as though it's them against the HOA. And that's possibly
Hmm.
the first mistake that people make that I try to point out. Because I try to tell people, don't forget that you are the HOA as the owner.
Correct.
You're not a
Yep.
third party. You have a lot to say about how the HOA
And
is
that's what I
run.
always encourage. I encourage brand new homeowners who have just bought a condo or a townhouse complex with a homeowners association to sit on the board. You actually do have opportunities. There are positions that get opened up, just like with a normal board of directors. You could be the secretary, you could be, an active participant in the board. You can be a non-active participant on the board, but be proactive in understanding what does the HOA cover, what issues are they dealing with. That way, you know exactly where the money is spent, because there are times, unfortunately, if the HOA is mismanaged, which has happened before. You know, HOAs again are they're people that may not necessarily know what they're doing. There's not really any special training for homeowners association board members, and there are
Exactly.
instances where if the funds are misappropriated and mismanaged, anybody can sit on the board and say, "Hey, where did that money go? The $400 times 200 units that are being collected each month, where's that money going and how's it being spent?" And that's where the budget comes in. And the more active of a participant the actual homeowner is in the HOA, the better they understand and the better peace of mind they will have when knowing what is the money, where's the money going, and how much money do we have, and what issues of deferred maintenance will I have to deal with in the next coming few years. I think
Right. And
it's
there's
super important.
Right, and there's another issue now that we're talking about that at length, and this is something I would like to say to everyone who's involved in an HOA, whether you're the president, the secretary, or a member. Make sure that you have your HOA bylaws inspected by an attorney at least every 2 years. Believe it,
Hmm.
believe me, there are plenty of changes almost on a yearly basis as to the regulations and the circumstances of HOA rules. They change all the time by law, not by choice, but by
Yeah,
law. And it's
love it.
incumbent upon you to realize that if you haven't had your HOA bylaws looked at in the last 5 or 10 years, I can guarantee you that there's a lot of rules that you think are enforced that may not be, and there's rules that are not included in your HOA that have been enforced for years. So it's extremely important. I know it's an expense, but it's a necessary expense to prevent serious litigation because, as you know, attorneys are out there all the time looking for cases to develop, and the easiest place they can find them is in HOAs that have not been updated.
Yeah, I agree with you, Stuart. And so I just want to highlight a couple of things on the loan end why an HOA is important. Anytime a home buyer goes into a transaction and there is an HOA, we do have our own separate condo approval department, which alongside the loan, the condo itself needs to be approved. Is it financially feasible? Is there a lot of deferred maintenance? Do they have enough reserves in the budget to left over to be correct any issues that need to be remedied, such as the roof, such as the balconies, or any other projects they may want to do. And so the condo association does get vetted if somebody's trying to buy a home using a loan. And so I just want to point that out that, that's good that the lender does that. But if there's a party that comes in that buys with cash, you don't have the condo department to do all of that homework for you. So it's important, especially as a cash buyer, if somebody's coming in buying cash, you put your blinders on thinking HOA is not important just because you don't have a loan. It's even more important, and it's even more important to have maybe an attorney look over those documents, or maybe I don't know who would at that point do that, but it's important for again for a cash buyer to look through the HOA, look at the budget, look through to see if there's a reserve study done, what other projects have been completed, and again, just watching out for my home buyers out there, whether they have cash or doing the loan, to review all of that in advance of signing on the dotted line.
I'm gonna uh, I'm gonna ask you a question, and then we do have a question from someone who just came on. They've got we were giving away our very first Starbucks card, believe it or not. and
Love
and
it.
and the question is, what is there a percentage? Let's take $1 million condo, for example, Anastasia. What would, I don't know if this is a fair question or not, but if you had $1 million condo and you have an association that may be delinquent, not have enough money in their reserves, what would the percentage be, for example?
So the percentage that we're looking for in order to obtain Fannie Mae financing is 10% of the budget allocated towards reserves. I have had instances where we're mid-budget year. Let's say right now we might be in the middle of their fiscal year, we're between 2025 and 2026 budget, and they're not allocating 10% towards reserves. We may have the board have an emergency meeting to meet and to start allocating 10%. That would remedy that information. In terms of how much money the association actually have in their bank is irrelevant. What the actual Fannie Mae Freddie Mac guidelines state is 10% must be allocated from the current budget towards reserves. And that's any home owner out there can actually review their budget. It's public information in terms of them having access to that. And they could see, is 10% being allocated? Because if they choose to refinance the condo to lower their rate, take cash out, any of those things, they will also need the same type of guidelines. 10% must be allocated towards reserves. That way, that money again goes into reserves bucket. It goes into a bank, which hopefully that reserve budget is then used towards projects such as, when they want to repave pavements or paint or, do termite inspection. And it usually typically covers on the exterior portions of somebody's home, and any other amenities that are included, maybe pool resurfacing, or they need a new pump for something, or they need garage door replacing. Usually the HOA does cover that. So most people think it's a waste. They're paying HOA and it's kind of like flush in the bucket. No, if you have termites on the exterior of your door, that could be covered by the HOA. If a pipe burst because your neighbor's, pipe burst or whatever, that typically is covered by the HOA as well. So there are advantages with having an HOA. That way, somebody is not managing that project themselves.
And even more importantly, if in fact a loan is denied because the HOA does not have enough in reserves, guess what? That relates to the property value of every unit that's in the that's in the project. In other words, when you have a rejection and loans cannot be taken against the property itself, the property does lose value. And it's an important thing to remember. So
Yep.
I'm glad to hear from Anastasia that there's quick solutions for that, because it sounds as
Yeah,
though,
we can
right,
fix it, and then we also have alternative loan products for non-warrantable condos. Non-warrantable condos means that it does not follow Fannie Mae Freddie Mac guidelines. So there are alternative
right.
solutions for those condos which don't fit the bucket, and maybe a solution is imminent. Let's say the budget will be fixed in upcoming 1 to 2 years, and you still want to buy the condo. There are opportunities to still continue with the loan, but just potentially have a little bit of a higher interest rate because it becomes non-warrantable. Now, what question do we have out there? Because I know it's
Okay,
coming
so the
up
question
on
is from our
11:18.
our buddy Jimmy Watson. He says, for two on a lot homes, how are the HOA work? How does the HOA work over the years? Randy, do you know the
Two on
answer
a
to that
lot, is
question?
that duplex? Is that so? It
Go,
depends
go.
if there's bylaws. It depends on how it's actually structured. Most duplexes do not have an HOA.
Right, that's why I
Although it,
find it
yeah.
right. Well, first of all, the two in a lots have to be townhomes, number one. In other words,
Mhm.
if the original developer created an HOA, then they work like any other HOA, despite the number of units. That's pretty rare, like Anastasia said, and we've actually seen cases. Well, let me give you an example. In Redondo Beach, in the North Redondo
Mhm.
section,
Mhm.
there's a lot of what we call two on a lots, where there's an actual structure that's not connected to one another. And people think
Mhm.
those are duplexes. They're not. They're actually two there's two properties on a lots, but they share a driveway. And so they're treated just like any other HOA. Now, one very important thing about that, a lot of times you'll see advertising where people are selling a home and saying, by the way, there's no association on this particular two on a lot because the two agreed a long time ago that they didn't want to have anything to do with one another. And that can happen. However, it has to be legally separated. There needs to be a filing actually, and you need to have an attorney handle this, wherein it
Mm.
is a legal document saying that there's no longer an association. So
Yep.
beware when you see advertisements that say, or even agents, I see it all the time where they say there's no association. No, there
And then
is
there's
an
an easement too
association.
that's recorded.
Right,
Yeah, the easement is
right,
recorded. If they do share a driveway, we don't want suddenly one neighbor to say, "Hey, I don't want you to use my driveway anymore to
right,
access your
right.
property." So there has
So
to be proper filings with the county assessor for that as well.
exactly, exactly.
Yeah.
So anyway, we've gone a little over, but this was a subject, like I said before, Anastasia and I could go on for hours and tell stories like you wouldn't believe. I've even been involved in litigation with regard to HOAs. So a lot of information I can help you with. I can give you some advice on, not legal, of course. I'm not giving legal advice, but experiences, especially when it comes to mold and people pointing fingers at problems that don't really exist or problems that are more serious than they seem. We've handled it all. So if you have any concerns about that, please feel free to contact me at any time. I can give you some advice or at least share some of my experiences over the last 25 years. Jimmy, I hope we answered your question and cleared it up a little bit. But anyway, come join us again, 11 o'clock next Tuesday. Next Tuesday, Anastasia, I thought we'd talk about older adults and their situation with regard to what they do with their, equity, if they're going to move on, or if they have to, in fact, sell their lot because of health reasons. I thought we'd dig into that a little bit because I know you
Love
have
it.
some great suggestions when it comes to the finance end of those kinds of situations.
Yep, we can definitely help all of them and more. So happy to help. If you have any other financing questions, right now is an amazing time to refinance. I'm getting a lot of questions on that. So if somebody wants to look at their scenario, I am taking calls daily, 323-823-2816. I am licensed in multiple states, and we have a lot of great refinancing going on right now, getting that rate lower, especially if you purchased in the last couple of years. So let's get at it, and let's help our seniors next week.
Okay,
Until
everybody,
next time.
see you from San to Soul and see you at 11 o'clock next Tuesday, everybody. Bye bye.